"How long have things been bad?" he asked gently, cutting into one of his pancakes. The knife went through them like they were butter and golden syrup oozed out onto the plate. "A few weeks," I admitted, focusing on my eggs so I wouldn't have to make direct eye contact. "But I think it's been bad longer than that. I just didn't want to see it." When you love someone, you find ways to excuse things. You tell yourself that the little criticisms are just honesty, that the way they dismiss your feelings is just them having a bad day, that the fact that they're always on their phone and won't look at you anymore is because they're stressed about work. I paused, and the diner seemed to get quieter around us, like the universe was leaning in to listen. "His name is Daniel," I continued. "He's a lawyer, very smart, very ambitious, very critical, I guess. I thought that was part of his charm at first. I thought it meant he cared enough to want me to be better, but somewhere along the way it stopped feeling like love and started feeling like judgment." Jason was really listening, not just waiting for his turn to talk, but actually absorbing what I was saying. He put down his fork and gave me his full attention. A clock on the wall, one of those old-fashioned ones with numbers and hands that moved with deliberate slowness, showed 4:18 a.m. We'd been in the diner for almost 45 minutes, and it felt like time had stopped moving at its normal pace. "I get it," he said softly. "Yeah, I get that. I went to Walmart late at night and didn't expect this broken flushed." The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar mechanical song as I pushed my cart through the nearly empty Walmart at 2:47 a.m. They buzzed with a sound that had become so familiar it was like a form of white noise, a constant reminder that I was awake while the rest of the world slept. The lights themselves were the kind that made everything look slightly washed out, slightly unreal, like I was moving through a dream and couldn't quite wake up. I know the exact time because I'd been staring at my phone's clock for the past 3 hours, watching the numbers change with glacial slowness. 2:14 to 2:32 to 2:47, unable to sleep, unable to face what was waiting for me at home. The store smelled like cleaning solution and plastic and something indefinably sad, like loneliness had a scent, and it permeated every corner of this place. My name is Marcus. I'm 28 years old, and if you'd asked me a year ago where I'd be right now, I never would have imagined this moment. I wouldn't have imagined myself alone in a Walmart at 3 in the morning, pretending to shop for things I didn't need, just to avoid going back to an apartment that no longer felt like home. The cart I was pushing squeaked slightly with each rotation of its wheels, one of them not quite aligned properly, creating a rhythm as I moved through the aisles. The store was ghostly at this hour. The shelves stretched out in long, orderly rows, each one stocked with products that promised to solve life's problems, cleaning products that promised to make everything shine, beauty products that promised to make you feel better about yourself, packaged foods that promised comfort in their familiarity. None of them were delivering on their promises for me, but I wandered past them anyway. Just me, a janitor pushing a mop 3 aisles over who pretended not to notice me when our eyes met, and the occasional night shift worker restocking shelves with mechanical precision, moving boxes and cans and packages with the kind of exhausted efficiency that comes from doing the same task 1,000 times. One of the workers, a young guy who looked like he might have been in his early 20s, was reorganizing the cereal aisle, his movements slow and deliberate. The past few weeks had been a slow deterioration of everything I thought was solid in my life. My relationship with Daniel, my boyfriend of 5 years, had been crumbling like old concrete piece by piece, day by day, the foundation becoming more unstable with each argument that went unresolved. We'd been perfect once, or at least that's what I kept telling myself on these 3 a.m. wanderings through Walmart. But perfect doesn't fall apart like this. Perfect doesn't end with arguments that start at dinner and don't resolve until sunrise, both of you sitting in the dark kitchen, too exhausted and too angry to continue but too hurt to stop. Perfect doesn't involve sleeping in separate rooms or communicating through text despite living in the same space. Your words stiff and formal like you're communicating with a stranger instead of someone you once knew intimately. I grabbed a basket instead of continuing with the cart, because honestly I wasn't even sure why I'd come here. The store was open 24 hours and there was something about that, the knowledge that I could come here anytime, that the store existed in a kind of eternal present tense, always available, always the same, that had appealed to me around 2 a.m. when I couldn't stand the sound of Daniel breathing in the next room anymore. I wandered into the clothing section, past racks of t-shirts and jeans and workout wear, all organized by size and color. The lights cast everything in a kind of pale, sickly glow. I wandered past the book section, even though I hadn't read anything longer than text messages in months. The books seemed to mock me with their promises of escape and adventure. I wandered because moving forward was better than standing still, because movement meant you were doing something, going somewhere, making progress, even if that progress was just from the DVDs to the greeting cards. The fluorescent lights reflected off my face in a mirror display and I barely recognized myself. My eyes were red-rimmed, my skin pale from lack of sleep, my expression hollow. And then I stopped, frozen in place, staring at something that made the air in my lungs seem to crystallize. It wasn't anything dramatic, no celestial sign or moment of clarity. It was just a greeting card that caught my eye, one of those overly emotional ones with a sunset on the cover, the kind of thing that I would normally have walked right past without a second glance. The sunset on the card was painted in shades of gold and orange and pink, and it was reflecting off water that you couldn't quite see, suggesting something vast and deep beneath it. I might have walked right past it any other time, but tonight I pulled it off the rack and read the text inside, my hands shaking slightly. New beginnings aren't about the end of what was, they're about the courage to discover what could be. New beginnings aren't about the end of what was, they're about the courage to discover what could be. I stood there, alone in the greeting card aisle of a Walmart in the middle of the night, surrounded by hundreds of other cards offering sentiments about love and friendship and life transitions, and felt something break inside me. Not break like shatter, like something sudden and violent, but break like a dam that can't hold the pressure anymore. Like the water inside has been accumulating for so long that the barrier just gives way, and everything floods out at once. My eyes started burning, and before I could stop myself, I was crying. Actually crying, in the middle of a Walmart, at 3 in the morning. For someone who hadn't allowed himself to cry since the fighting started with Daniel, who'd been performing the role of the person who had it together, who could handle anything, who was strong enough to weather any storm, this was monumental. I'd been holding it all in like a pressure cooker with no release valve. The fear, the disappointment, the heartbreak, the guilt, the anger, all of it accumulated in my chest, making it hard to breathe, making it hard to think about anything else. The tears came silently at first, then not so silently. I covered my face with my hands, not caring who might see, not caring that there was a night shift worker reorganizing the condiment aisle about 50 feet away who'd probably noticed something was wrong. My shoulders shook, and I pressed my forehead against the greeting cards, feeling the cardboard edges dig into my skin. That's when I literally bumped into him. That's when I literally bumped into him. I wasn't looking where I was going, too lost in my own spiral of emotions, and apparently he wasn't either. We collided near the pharmacy counter with more force than I would have expected from either of us, and his coffee cup went flying in an arc that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so disastrous. The cup made a whistling sound as it flew through the air, and when it hit the tile floor, it shattered with a sharp crack that echoed through the quiet store. The coffee splashed across the floor in a dark pool, spreading across the white checkered squares like a dark watercolor painting. Like someone had spilled the night itself onto the bright floor. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," I said immediately, which was my instinct in every situation. Apologize first, explain never. It was a survival mechanism I'd perfected over years of trying to take up as little space as possible in other people's lives, of trying to minimize the impact of my own existence. The man looked up at me, and for a moment everything else in the store seemed to disappear. The humming of the fluorescent lights faded away. The sound of the janitor's mop in the distance became muted. Even my own emotional turmoil seemed to recede into the background as I took in his face. He was around my age, maybe a few years younger, maybe a few years older. It was hard to tell in the harsh Walmart lighting. He had warm brown eyes that seemed to hold genuine kindness, eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled despite the ruined coffee. His smile was natural, unforced, the kind of smile that suggests someone has learned how to find joy even in small disasters. His hair was a beautiful dark curly mess, like he'd just woken up or like he'd been running his hands through it in frustration, and it fell across his forehead in a way that was disarmingly charming. He was wearing a faded hoodie that said Dreamers on the front in letters that had been washed so many times they were barely visible, and it was so worn and comfortable looking that I immediately wanted to bury myself in it. He was the kind of beautiful that doesn't announce itself loudly but reveals itself slowly as you look at him. The kind that comes from genuinely not caring too much about how you appear, from being comfortable in your own skin even when that skin is covered in coffee from a spilled cup. Next to him, I felt painfully aware of my own appearance. Wrinkled sweatpants that had a small hole in the knee, a shirt I'd stolen from Daniel that still smelled like his cologne, no makeup, my hair in a messy bun that had started the day somewhat intentional and had now devolved into pure chaos. I was a wreck and he was something else entirely. "Hey, don't worry about it," he said, his voice warm and unhurried. "This thing was already getting cold anyway. I've been wandering around this store for like an hour. I think I've walked past the same display of garden gnomes at least 5 times." Despite everything, the heartbreak, the exhaustion, the existential crisis I'd been having in the greeting card aisle, I felt a small smile tug at my lips. "Garden gnomes at 3 a.m., I asked. I actually have no idea why I'm here, he admitted, crouching down to pick up pieces of the broken cup. I was having a rough night, and instead of dealing with it like a normal person, I decided to come to Walmart and contemplate the life choices that led me to this moment. Apparently, that includes discovering a passionate interest in garden gnomes. I grabbed some paper towels from a nearby shelf and helped him clean up. We worked in companionable silence for a moment, and there was something soothing about having a task, something concrete to do. I get it, I said finally. The rough night part, I mean, not the garden gnome part, that one seems specific to you. He laughed, and it was the first genuine sound of joy I'd heard in what felt like years but was probably just weeks. When you're in pain, time distorts. A month of unhappiness can feel like a lifetime. I'm Jason, by the way, he said, extending his hand for a shake, even though we were both holding dirty paper towels. Marcus, I replied, shaking his hand anyway. Nice to officially meet you, even if our introduction involved a coffee casualty. So, Marcus, Jason said, tossing the paper towels in the trash, what brings you to the Walmart dimension at this hour? Are you also here on an existential crisis, or is this a different category of late-night retail experience? I should have deflected, I should have made a joke and moved on. That's what the old Marcus would have done. But standing there in the fluorescent light with this stranger who had kind eyes and a genuine smile, something in me wanted to be honest. Relationship problems, I said simply. I left my apartment because being there was worse than being here, and that's saying something because I'm in Walmart at 3 in the morning. Jason's expression softened immediately. He didn't pity me, I could tell, because his eyes didn't do that thing people do when they feel sorry for you, when they get that patronizing look. Instead, he looked like he understood something fundamental about what I was going through. Yeah, he said quietly. Yeah, I get that. I'm here for basically the same reason, actually. Relationship that's falling apart, and I needed to get out. Sometimes when you're in a place with someone and the place is full of memories, you can't breathe. So you go to Walmart at 3 in the morning because at least here there are no memories, just fluorescent lights and the overwhelming smell of plastic. Exactly, I said, and there was so much relief in that one word. Relief that someone else understood. Relief that I wasn't completely insane for thinking a midnight Walmart trip was better than facing reality. Have you eaten anything? Jason asked suddenly. No, I realized. I hadn't eaten since lunch. The argument with Daniel had started mid-afternoon, and by the time evening rolled around, the thought of eating felt impossible. Me neither, Jason said. And I've learned from experience that existential crises are infinitely worse on an empty stomach. The Walmart cafe is closed, obviously, but there's a 24-hour diner about 5 minutes from here. It's not fancy, but the coffee is good and the pancakes are life-changing. Want to come with? Now, in theory, this was the moment where I should have been cautious. A stranger inviting me to leave a public place and go somewhere more private, that's like dating app murder in the making. My mother had raised me to be smarter than that, but there was something about Jason's offer that didn't feel dangerous. It felt like a life raft. Yeah, I said, yeah, I'd like that. The diner was exactly what I expected, but somehow more than I expected at the same time. As we pushed through the glass door, a small bell chimed above our heads, announcing our arrival to the nearly empty establishment. The smell hit me first, a mixture of old grease, fresh coffee, and something indefinably nostalgic that made me think of road trips and late-night conversations, and the kind of places where time moved differently than in the rest of the world. The interior was a time capsule from somewhere around the 1950s, but in that deliberately maintained way that means someone cares about preserving it. The walls were a soft cream color, with dark wood paneling running along the lower half, punctuated by framed black and white photographs of the town as it had been decades ago. There were pictures of the diner itself from different eras, showing how it had stayed essentially the same while the world outside changed. The booths were the kind with red vinyl that had been patched and repatched over the years, creating a map of the diner's history written in slightly mismatched material. Some of the patches were older, faded to a dull rose color, while others were newer, a brighter red that looked almost out of place in the worn-in aesthetic. The metal frames that held the booths together had that specific dull shine that comes from decades of being wiped down by countless hands. Along one wall, there was a long counter with spinning chrome stools, their red vinyl seats matching the booths. The chrome had a few dents and scratches, but it gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and when I sat down, the stool spun with that satisfying mechanical whir that made me feel like I was part of a time when things were built to last. The floor was black and white checkered tile, the kind you see in vintage diners and old-fashioned ice cream parlors. Some of the tiles had a slight yellowish tinge from age, and there was a thin strip of slightly raised tile along one edge, evidence of imperfect repairs made at some point in the past. Under the harsh overhead lights, the patterns almost seemed to move, creating a sense of vertigo if you stared at them too long. In the corner near the front window, there was a jukebox that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1985, with garish colors and a list of songs that must have been selected by someone with very specific taste in music. Through its curved plastic case, you could see the vinyl records arranged vertically, waiting to be selected. We slid into a booth by the window, and the vinyl made that distinctive squeaking sound that old booths make when you sit down. I could see the empty parking lot stretching out into darkness beyond the glass, the streetlights casting everything in a sulphurous yellow glow. The night pressed against the windows like it was trying to get in. A few cars were parked in scattered spaces, abandoned by their owners at various hours of the night. A waitress appeared almost immediately, like she'd been expecting us, or at least expecting anyone to fill the empty space. She was probably in her 60s, with kind eyes and a face that suggested she'd worked in this diner for longer than I'd been alive. Her name tag read Dorothy in faded letters, and she was carrying a pot of coffee that looked like it had been brewed several hours ago and had been kept warm on a hot plate ever since. "You two look like you could use some coffee," she said without being asked, without even waiting for us to settle in or look at menus. She set down two ceramic mugs that had a chip on one edge and were stained with years of coffee residue, and she poured the dark liquid without waiting for a response. "You two look like you could use some coffee," she said with a knowing smile. "I can tell you're having one of those nights, or mornings I guess. Time gets weird at this hour. I'll be back for your order in just a second." She walked away, her waitress's apron white with pink trim, stained with the evidence of countless spills, swaying with each step. The coffee was hot and bitter, but it was exactly what I needed. The mug warmed my hands and I held it like it was something precious. "Jason ordered pancakes, the life-changing kind," he reminded me with a grin that made a small dimple appear in his left cheek, "and I ordered eggs and toast not because I was hungry but because eating seemed like the kind of normal activity I should participate in." Dorothy repeated the order back to us without writing it down, a testament to decades of muscle memory, and disappeared into the kitchen. We sat in silence for a moment, and I realized that this might have been a mistake. What did I have in common with this guy besides both having terrible relationship problems? He could be a serial killer, or just someone looking to take advantage of someone who was clearly emotionally vulnerable. My mother had raised me to be smarter than accepting rides from strangers or going to unknown locations with people I just met in the middle of the night. But then I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized that his hands were shaking slightly as he wrapped them around his coffee mug. His fingernails were bitten down to the quick, and there was a small bandage on his left index finger from where he'd apparently bitten too deep. His eyes, which had seemed so warm and kind in the Walmart lighting, now seemed vulnerable in the diner's fluorescent glow, like they'd seen something they couldn't unsee. That vulnerability made him real. It made him trustworthy in a way. I could see that he was hurting just like I was hurting, that he was a person with his own demons and his own late-night crises, and somehow that made the whole situation feel less dangerous and more like fate. Then Jason started talking, and all my doubts fell away. "So, 5 years," he said, and for a moment I didn't understand. Then I realized he was referencing what I'd said earlier. "You said you'd been in the relationship for 5 years, right? I got that from your comment about things falling apart." "Yeah," I said. 5 years, we met at a Pride event. He was volunteering at an information booth for LGBTQ+ resources, and I was just there trying to figure out my own existence. We talked for like 3 hours straight. I felt like I'd found my person, like the universe had put him exactly where I needed him to be. Jason nodded like he understood. The diner had started to fill up slightly. A couple of truckers sat at the counter, speaking in low voices about road conditions and fuel prices. An older man sat at a booth across from us, nursing a cup of coffee and a piece of pie, staring out the window like he was looking for something that would never appear. Dorothy came back with our food, setting the plates down with practiced efficiency. She set my eggs in front of me, perfectly cooked with the yolks still slightly runny, exactly how I would have ordered them if I'd thought to specify, and placed Jason's pancakes in front of him like she was presenting a masterpiece. They were enormous, stacked high, swimming in butter and topped with a generous pour of maple syrup that was still steaming slightly from being warmed on the stove. "You two look like you've been through something," Dorothy observed, and I realized there was something maternal in her tone, something that suggested she'd seen many broken-hearted people sit in this booth at odd hours and she'd learned to recognize the signs. "Do you need anything else?" No, this is perfect, Jason said, looking at the pancakes like they might actually be life-changing. I picked at my eggs, pushing them around the plate, and Jason started talking again. I've got a question, Jason said after a moment, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but do you still love him? The question caught me off guard. I put down my fork and sat back, really considering it. I don't know, I said honestly. I think I love who I thought he was, but who he is now, I don't even recognize him sometimes. And I don't think he recognizes me either. We've become these two people living in the same apartment, speaking the same language but unable to understand each other at all. That's the hardest kind of lonely, Jason said softly, being alone together. What about you? I asked. How long have you been with your person? 3 years, Jason said, and there was something heavier in those two words than there should have been. His fork scraped against his plate, creating a small metallic sound that seemed to echo in the quiet diner. His name is Alex, and God, this is going to sound stupid, but he had an affair. I felt my heart clench. I'm sorry. Yeah, Jason said. He cut another piece of pancake, but he didn't eat it, just pushed it around on his plate instead. Me too. I found out about 2 weeks ago. Found some text messages on his laptop that he'd left open, really romantic stuff, about how the other person made him feel alive again, how he felt trapped, how he'd made a mistake with me. The waitress came by and refilled our coffee cups without asking if we wanted more, and I was grateful for the small kindness of it. The coffee was still hot, still slightly bitter, still exactly what I needed. He told you all that? I asked, surprised. No, Jason said bitterly. He just said I was being paranoid and insecure when I confronted him, said I was looking for problems where there weren't any, said I was being dramatic, but I had the evidence right there, and he still tried to gaslight me. He actually tried to convince me that I'd misread it. I searched for a word strong enough. That's terrible. The worst part, Jason continued, his voice getting quieter, is that I would have forgiven him. I know that probably sounds weak or pathetic, but it's true. I love him, and if he just admitted it and wanted to work on things, I would have tried. But the fact that he lied about it, that he tried to manipulate me into thinking I was crazy for seeing the truth, that broke something in me that I don't think can be fixed. We ate in silence for a while after that, not an uncomfortable silence but a shared one. The kind of quiet that happens between people who understand that sometimes the world is cruel and unfair and people hurt each other in the worst ways possible. Can I ask you something? Jason said finally. Do you think you're going to leave him? I hadn't let myself think about that directly. Leaving meant accepting that the 5 years were over. Leaving meant admitting failure. Leaving meant starting over from scratch at 28 years old, which suddenly felt ancient. I think I have to, I said slowly. I think staying would slowly kill me. Yeah, Jason said, that's what I've been grappling with too. Alex keeps calling me saying we should talk, that he wants to work it out, that he loves me, and I can't. Because even if I could forgive the affair, I can't forgive the lying. I can't be with someone who makes me question my own reality. So what are you going to do? I asked. I don't know, Jason admitted. I have an apartment that we share, I have a cat that I love, I have a job that I've been distracted from because all of this is consuming me. I have a family that's going to be disappointed because they really liked Alex and they're going to have a lot of questions about why he's not coming to Christmas anymore. It's all just a lot. I reached across the table and put my hand on his, and he didn't pull away. We sat like that for a moment. Two strangers connected by the universal experience of heartbreak, finding some small comfort in knowing we weren't alone. What's your name again? I asked softly, even though I already knew. Jason, he said, and you're Marcus. Yeah, I said, I'm Marcus. And in that moment, in that old diner at 4 a.m. with a cup of mediocre coffee and pancakes that were apparently life-changing, they were pretty good, I felt something shift inside me. Not healing, it was too early for that, but something like acceptance. Acceptance that this was happening, that it was painful, and that somehow I would survive it. When the sun started to creep up over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jason and I were still in the diner. Dorothy had refilled our coffees at least 4 times. The diner had gone from being nearly empty to starting to fill with early morning workers, construction guys, nurses coming off night shift, a few truckers passing through town. I can't believe we've been here for almost 3 hours, I said, checking my phone. It was 6:15 a.m. In a weird way, this has been the best night I've had in months, Jason said. Which is sad but also kind of beautiful, like Walmart brought us together, that's a good story. Should we tell people that? I asked with a small smile. That we met at Walmart, or should we come up with something more romantic? Nah, Jason said. I like the truth. We were both broken, we both showed up at Walmart at the worst time of our lives, and somehow we made each other's nights a little less terrible. Is it terrible? I asked. I mean, technically, it's still terrible. Our relationships are still falling apart. We're both probably going to go through a lot of pain over the next few weeks and months. Yeah, Jason said, but we're not going through it alone. I mean, I just met you, so maybe I'm being too intense, but I feel like we're supposed to be friends, like the universe is saying, hey, these two guys need each other right now. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that the universe was that intentional, that kind, but I'd learned a long time ago not to trust in cosmic intervention. Can I give you my number? Jason asked. And you don't have to use it if you don't want to, but if you have a rough night and need to talk to someone who gets it, I'd like to be here for that. I typed his number into my phone and he did the same with mine. We exchanged them like we were making a formal agreement, which I guess we were, in a way. So what are you going to do? Jason asked. Today, I mean, are you going to go home and talk to Daniel? I think I have to, I said, dreading it already. I can't just disappear, he's probably awake now, probably wondering where I am. What are you going to say? I don't know yet, I admitted. Part of me wants to just say, this isn't working, I'm leaving. But another part of me wants to try to talk to him to see if there's any way to save this. I don't know if I'm being optimistic or just pathetic. You're not pathetic, Jason said firmly. You're being human, and it's okay to want to try even if it might not work. We paid our bill and walked out into the morning. The sun was fully up now and the world looked new, like it had been reset overnight. The parking lot smelled like fresh asphalt and possibility. Where did you park? Jason asked. Over there, I said, pointing to my car, a beat-up Subaru that had seen better days. I'm over here, Jason said, pointing in the other direction. So I guess this is where we say goodbye. For now, I said, and I meant it. Something told me this wasn't the end of our story. Thank you, by the way, for last night, for listening, for not making me feel like I was crazy for showing up at Walmart at 3 in the morning. Thank you for being there, Jason said, for making me feel like my problems mattered. A lot of people would have just avoided me or made awkward small talk, but you actually cared about what I was going through. We hugged then, a real hug, the kind of hug that means something. And when we pulled apart, I could see that Jason's eyes were a little watery, and I'm sure mine were too. Text me, he said, please, whatever happens, let me know you're okay. I will, I promised. I drove home in silence, not wanting to listen to music or podcasts or anything that would make me stop thinking about what I needed to do. The apartment was quiet when I got there. Daniel was still asleep, probably. At 6:45 a.m. on a Saturday, most people would be. I took a long shower, standing under the hot water until it ran cold, trying to wash away the night, trying to prepare myself for what was coming. When I got out, I put on clean clothes, not clothes that smelled like Daniel, but clothes that were actually mine. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table and waited. Daniel came out at around 8 a.m., looking rumpled and confused. Where were you? He asked immediately, and there was no concern in his voice, just accusation. I went out, I said calmly. I needed to clear my head. At 3 in the morning? He was angry now. Angry in a way that seemed disproportionate, which made me wonder what else was going on, what other secret was eating at him. Yes, I said, at 3 in the morning, because being here in this apartment with you was unbearable. Oh, here we go, Daniel said, rolling his eyes. The drama, Marcus, you're being so overdramatic about everything. We had one argument and you acted like it was the end of the world. It wasn't one argument, I said, and I was surprised by how calm I sounded. It's been weeks of arguments, it's been months of you treating me like I'm not good enough, it's been a year of you being emotionally checked out of this relationship. Daniel's face got red. You know what? I've been dealing with a lot at work, I've been stressed, that's not something I should have to apologize for. I'm not asking you to apologize for being stressed, I said. I'm asking you to acknowledge that we're not working anymore. I'm asking you to be honest about whether you even want to be in this relationship. There was a long silence. Daniel walked past me and poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot I'd made. I don't know, he said finally, and he sounded tired. I don't know if I do, I don't know anything anymore. And that was it. That was the moment when I knew with absolute certainty that this relationship was over. Not because he'd had an affair like Alex had with Jason, but because neither of us wanted to be here anymore. We'd both checked out, but neither of us had been brave enough to say it until now. Okay, I said, and I felt surprisingly peaceful. Then I think we both know what we need to do. Are you asking me to move out? Daniel asked, and there was something almost vulnerable in his voice, like he hadn't expected me to be the one to end it. Like he'd thought he'd be the one in control of this narrative. No, I said, I'm moving out. I'll find a place this week. I'll be gone by the end of the month. Marcus, Daniel said, and he reached out like he wanted to grab my hand, but I pulled away. I don't think we should make any rash decisions right now. This isn't rash, I said. This is 5 years of decisions finally coming to a head. We don't love each other anymore, Daniel. We're just comfortable, and comfortable isn't enough. I went into the bedroom and started packing a suitcase with some clothes and personal items. Daniel watched from the doorway, not trying to stop me, not saying anything else. By 10 a.m., I was on the road, driving away from the apartment that I'd thought would be my home for the rest of my life. I called Jason from my car. Hey, he answered on the second ring. How did it go? I'm leaving him, I said, and I wasn't sure if I was crying or just tired. I'm actually doing it. Are you okay? Jason asked. No, I said honestly, but I think I will be. The next few weeks were a blur of practical matters and emotional turmoil. I spent my days apartment hunting, moving boxes, changing my address at the utility companies, and dealing with all the mundane logistics of dismantling a life I'd built with someone. But I spent my nights talking to Jason. We texted at first, long, rambling conversations that would start at 11 p.m. and somehow turn into sunrise conversations. He was dealing with his own nightmare. Alex refused to accept that the relationship was over. He kept showing up at Jason's work, sending long emails about how much he loved Jason, how they could work through this, how Jason was being unreasonable. He's not even addressing the affair, Jason told me one night over text. He's just acting like if he apologizes enough times it will go away, like the betrayal will just evaporate if he says the right words. How are you holding up? I asked. Not well, he admitted. I had to block his number today. He was calling me every 30 minutes. My therapist says he's using intensity as a love language and I need to hold firm boundaries. But it's hard when you still love someone and they're making it seem like you're the bad guy for leaving. I'd started seeing a therapist too. Her name was Dr. Chen and she was exactly what I needed, kind but direct, understanding but not coddling. You feel guilty, she'd said in our first session after I'd explained the situation with Daniel. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you're still operating under the belief that staying in a bad situation is more noble than leaving. I invested 5 years, I'd said, and now I'm just throwing it away. You're not throwing it away, Dr. Chen had replied. You're releasing it, and there's a difference. Throwing something away implies recklessness. Releasing it implies that you've recognized it's no longer serving you and you're being brave enough to let go. About 4 weeks after that night at Walmart, Jason suggested we meet up in person again. We'd talked every day since that early morning diner visit, but we hadn't actually seen each other since then. I found an apartment, he said on the phone. A 1-bedroom in the Arts District. It's small and kind of rundown, but it's mine, and I want you to come see it. I want to introduce you to my cat, Freddie, and I want to cook you dinner. You cook? I asked with a smile. Terribly, he admitted. But I'm trying. There's this cooking class I'm taking on Wednesday nights and I thought maybe if I had incentive, like impressing you, I might actually pay attention instead of just texting through the whole thing. You texted through a cooking class? I asked, laughing. I was dealing with some stuff, he said defensively. But the important thing is that I'm here now and I want to make you something that won't give you food poisoning. That's a low bar, I said, but I'll take it. I'd found my own apartment by then, a 1-bedroom in a slightly better condition than Jason's but in a similar neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. For the first time in my adult life I was living alone and it was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The night I met Jason at his new place, I was nervous in a way I hadn't been since our first real conversation. What if that magic we'd found in the diner had been a product of circumstance? What if we were only compatible in crisis? But the moment he opened the door and smiled at me, I knew that wasn't true. "Welcome to my humble abode," he said, gesturing to the small but cozy apartment. It had exposed brick, tall windows, and in the corner, a tabby cat with one ear that folded slightly forward, regarding me with suspicion. "This is Freddy," Jason said, scooping up the cat. "Freddy, this is Marcus. He's going to be coming around a lot, so you might as well get used to him." "How do you know I'm going to be coming around a lot?" I asked. Jason set down the cat and looked at me seriously. "Because I really like you, Marcus, and I think you might really like me too, and I think we need each other right now. Not in a dependent way, but in a this person gets me kind of way, and that's rare and I don't want to waste it." I felt my heart do something it hadn't done in a very long time, something that felt like hope. "I do like you," I said, "but I want to be honest about something. I'm not ready for a relationship. I just ended one and I need time to figure out who I am on my own." "I know," Jason said, "and I'm not asking for a relationship, I'm asking for friendship. I'm asking for someone who will let me be a mess and won't judge me for it, and I'm offering the same thing to you." "Okay," I said, and I felt relief wash over me. "Okay, I can do that." That night, Jason made pasta that was actually pretty good despite his earlier warnings. We sat on his second-hand couch, he'd gone to Goodwill to furnish the apartment, and watched a movie that neither of us paid attention to because we were too busy talking. He told me about his childhood, about how his parents had been surprisingly accepting when he came out in high school, about how he'd always wanted to be a writer but had taken a job at a nonprofit instead because it felt more stable, about how meeting Alex had made him feel like finally someone understood the real him. I told him about my family, my mother who called once a week and always asked if I was seeing anyone, not fully understanding that I'd been in a committed relationship for 5 years, about my father who'd passed away when I was 20, and how I'd spent the past 8 years trying to make him proud, even though he would never see what I accomplished, about how I'd wanted to be a teacher but had become an accountant instead because it paid the bills. "Do you ever regret it?" Jason asked, "not becoming a teacher?" "Every day," I admitted, "but I didn't know how to choose the harder path. I still don't really. I don't know how to do the brave thing." "You left Daniel," Jason pointed out. "That took bravery." "That took desperation," I corrected. "I left because I couldn't stay, not because I was being brave." "Sometimes those are the same thing," Jason said. We fell asleep on that second-hand couch, Freddy curled up between us, and for the first time in a long time I slept without nightmares. Over the next couple of months, Jason and I became fixtures in each other's lives. We had a standing dinner date on Thursday nights, rotating between his apartment and mine. We'd text throughout the day, sharing funny things we'd seen, articles we'd read, thoughts we were processing. He became my person, not a romantic person but a soul-deep person. The kind of person you text at 2 a.m. when you can't sleep and they respond immediately because they weren't sleeping either. We dealt with each other's breakup fallout together. When Daniel finally moved out of our apartment and I spent the entire day crying, Jason came over and sat with me on the floor of the empty bedroom and didn't say anything, just existed beside me. When Alex threatened to take Freddy as revenge for Jason not taking him back, we spent an afternoon at an animal lawyer's office, making sure that Jason had full legal rights to his cat. "I can't believe we're literally fighting for a cat in court," Jason said as we walked out of the lawyer's office. "This is the most dramatic thing to happen to us yet." "I mean, we met at Walmart in the middle of an existential crisis," I pointed out. "I don't think anything we do is going to top that level of drama." We laughed, and it was the kind of laughter that felt healing, not forced, not desperate, but genuine. 3 months after our Walmart meeting, Jason got a text from Alex. He'd accepted a job in San Francisco and was moving away. He wanted to say goodbye to Jason in person. "Should I do it?" Jason asked me over coffee. "Do you want to?" I asked back. "I don't know," Jason said. "Part of me wants closure. Part of me is terrified that if I see him, all of my resolve will disappear and I'll take him back." "Then don't go alone," I said. "I'll come with you." They met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. I sat at a corner table with a book, far enough away to not be intrusive but close enough to be present if Jason needed me. Alex was handsome in the way that I could see why Jason had fallen for him. He had the kind of confidence that people mistake for kindness, and he held Jason's hand while he apologized. "I made a mistake," he said, and I could see the words washing over Jason's face like a physical thing. "I've had months to think about it, and I know now that I was an idiot. I threw away the best thing in my life because I was insecure and stupid." "Yeah," Jason said quietly, "you did." "Come with me to San Francisco," Alex said, and his voice was so earnest, so desperate. "We can start over, fresh city, fresh start. I promise I'll be better. I promise I'll never hurt you again." I watched Jason's face and I could see him wavering, could see him wanting to believe in that fresh start, that promise of happily ever after. But then he took his hand back. "I can't," Jason said, "not because I don't love you but because I don't trust you, and you can't build a relationship on anything less than that." "You'll regret this," Alex said, and there was venom in his voice now. "You'll be alone and you'll realize that you threw away the best relationship you'll ever have." "Maybe," Jason said, "but I'd rather be alone than be with someone who makes me question my own sanity." We left after that and Jason didn't cry until we got to my apartment. Then he sat on my couch and cried hard. The kind of crying that comes from finally accepting that something you wanted so badly is never going to happen. Jason asked me later that night, sitting on my couch with his head on my shoulder, Freddie purring on his lap. "No," I said firmly, "you did the right thing." "How do you know?" he asked, his voice small. "Because the right thing is the one that lets you sleep at night," I said. "The one that doesn't require you to pretend to be someone you're not." And maybe that was naive. Maybe in 6 months or a year, Jason would see San Francisco pictures on Instagram and wonder if he'd made a terrible mistake. But for now, in this moment, I knew that he'd made the choice that honored himself, and that was enough. Summer arrived with the kind of heat that makes the city feel alive and suffocating at the same time. The pavement radiates warmth, and walking down the street feels like moving through a living, breathing organism that's pressing in on you from all sides. Jason had thrown himself into his writing. The nonprofit job had given him the flexibility to work remotely, which meant he was spending his days at coffee shops, laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard. He'd started sending me pages of a novel he was working on, a story about two men who meet in unexpected places and discover that love comes in many forms. "Is this about us?" I asked him one Thursday night as we sat on the roof of my apartment building, feet dangling over the edge, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose gold. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe it's about all of us, everyone who's ever been broken and found someone to help put the pieces back together." I'd started therapy more regularly, seeing Dr. Chen twice a week instead of once. We were working through what she called my pattern of self-abandonment, the way I'd learned early on to make myself smaller so that I wouldn't be a burden to anyone else. "It comes from losing your father," Dr. Chen had explained in one session. "You learn that people can disappear, that the people you love can be taken away. So you learn to be undemanding, to take up as little space as possible, hoping that if you were small enough, quiet enough, nobody would leave you. But of course that doesn't work, because eventually someone always leaves and you're left wondering if you could have prevented it by being more, not less." The realization had hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent 8 years trying to be invisible and it had gotten me nowhere. One afternoon in July, I got a call from Daniel. My heart jumped into my throat the moment I saw his name on the caller ID. We hadn't spoken since the day I'd left the apartment, communicating only through lawyers and email about the division of our belongings. "Hi," I said cautiously, answering on the fourth ring. "Hey," Daniel said, and he sounded tired. "How are you?" "I'm okay," I said, unsure if I was lying or not. "How are you?" "I've been better," he admitted. I've been wanting to call you for a while, but I didn't know if you'd want to hear from me." "What do you want?" I asked, and I was proud of how steady my voice sounded. "I wanted to apologize," Daniel said, "for everything, for being dismissive of your feelings, for making you feel small, for not appreciating what I had when I had it." I closed my eyes and tried to feel something: anger, hurt, forgiveness, but what I felt was mainly just tired. "Okay," I said. "That's it?" Daniel asked, and there was almost a note of disappointment in his voice, like he'd expected me to either rage at him or break down in tears. "What do you want me to say?" I asked. "That I forgive you, that I'm sorry too, that everything was my fault?" No, Daniel paused. I wanted you to know that none of this was your fault. I treated you badly and you didn't deserve it. I know, I said, and I was surprised to realize that I actually did know that now. Somewhere between the diner at 3 a.m. and this moment on an ordinary July afternoon, I'd accepted that Daniel's cruelty said nothing about my worth. Are you seeing anyone? Daniel asked suddenly. No, I said, but I have someone in my life who's very important to me. A boyfriend? Daniel asked, and there was something almost hopeful in his voice, like if I was seeing someone else it would erase what we'd had. A friend, I said, someone who knows me, someone who gets me. I wanted to know you, Daniel said quietly. I think I was just too broken to do it. And maybe that was true. Maybe Daniel had been doing the best he could with the emotional resources he had available. Maybe hurt people, and he'd been hurt before I came along. I hope you're okay, I said, and I meant it. I hope you find someone who can give you what you need. After we hung up, I sat for a long time just staring at my phone. Jason called just as the sun was starting to set. Hey, did you want to do dinner tonight? He asked. I'm attempting to make that pasta primavera thing the cooking class taught us last week. Yeah, I said, yeah, I'd like that. I didn't tell Jason about the call from Daniel right away. I waited until we were sitting at his small kitchen table, surrounded by the chaos of his attempted cooking, dirty pots, spilled olive oil, a tomato that had rolled under the refrigerator. He wanted to apologize, I said, twirling pasta on my fork. And he did. It was very respectful and mature, and it didn't change anything. Did you want it to? Jason asked. A week ago, maybe, I admitted. But not anymore. I think I've finally accepted that Daniel and I were never going to work. It wasn't because he was a bad person or I was a bad person. It was just incompatibility. Sometimes love isn't enough when you're fundamentally incompatible. That's very mature of you, Jason said with a smile. Dr. Chen said something last week that stuck with me, I continued. She said that we often confuse love with compatibility. We think that if we love someone enough, it will be enough to sustain a relationship. But love is just one ingredient. You also need trust, respect, shared values, similar communication styles, and Daniel and I didn't have most of that. What about you and me? Jason asked, and there was something almost teasing in his voice but also something serious underneath it. Do we have those things? Yeah, I said, looking at him across the table. He had a smudge of tomato sauce on his cheek, and his hair was in that permanently disheveled state that made him look like he'd just rolled out of bed. I think we do, but it's different because we're not trying to be romantic partners, we're just trying to be there for each other. Would you want to be romantic partners? Jason asked, and the question hung in the air between us like a living thing. I took a long time answering because it deserved a thoughtful response. I don't know, I said honestly. I think I care about you too much to risk it on something I'm not ready for. I think if we tried to be romantic and it didn't work out, I'd lose you, and I can't lose you right now. Fair enough, Jason said, and he reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I just needed to know that you were thinking about it too. August brought a twist that neither of us saw coming. Jason's manuscript, the one he'd been working on all summer, had caught the attention of a literary agent. He'd entered it in a contest on a whim, expecting rejection like all the other submissions he'd sent out to agents over the years. But instead, he got a call. I want to represent you, the agent, a woman named Patricia, had said over the phone. Jason had called me immediately after, and his voice was shaking with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. That's incredible, I'd said, and I meant it. I was genuinely happy for him, even as I felt a little pinch of something else, something that felt uncomfortably like jealousy. There's a catch, Jason said, and his excitement dimmed slightly. She wants me to move to New York. She's got connections with several major publishers there, and she thinks the book will have a better shot with in-person meetings. She's asking if I can relocate within the next month. New York, across the country, away from me. Oh, I said, and I tried to keep my voice neutral. I know, Jason said, and he sounded miserable. I know this is terrible timing, we just got things stable, you're just starting to feel good again, and now I have to decide between my dreams and my what? I prompted when he trailed off. My best friend, he said softly, I have to decide between my dreams and you. No, you don't, I said, and I was surprised by the strength in my voice. You have to decide what's right for you, and what's right for you is pursuing this. This is what you've always wanted. But I don't want to leave you, Jason said. I know, I said, but you have to, because if you stay, you're going to resent me, and if you resent me, I lose you anyway, so you might as well go and follow your dreams and we'll figure out the friendship part after. Jason moved to New York in September. The week before he left, we spent almost every moment together. We went to our favorite coffee shops and pretended we weren't saying goodbye. We walked through the city and pointed out places we'd been together. We sat on rooftops and watched the sunset and didn't talk about the fact that it might be one of the last sunsets we'd watched together for a very long time. The night before he left, we sat on the floor of his empty apartment. He was shipping most of his things ahead and flying with just a suitcase, and passed a bottle of wine back and forth. I'm scared, Jason admitted, his head on my shoulder. What if the book doesn't sell? What if Patricia drops me? What if I move across the country and fail anyway? Then you'll have tried, I said, and you'll know that you gave it everything you had. There's no greater failure than never trying at all. Who are you and what have you done with Marcus? Jason asked with a sad laugh. The Marcus I met at Walmart would never say something so wise. Maybe I've grown up a little, I said. Maybe having you in my life showed me that you're allowed to want things for yourself. That self-care isn't selfish, that pursuing your dreams isn't abandoning the people you love. Jason cried that night and I held him, and we didn't make any promises about staying in touch or visiting or how this would work. Because we both knew that life was messy and complicated, and the best we could do was be honest and kind to each other as we navigated it. The next morning, I drove him to the airport. We hugged at the departure gate and he held on longer than necessary. Thank you, he said, for everything, for that night at Walmart, for being my person when I needed one the most. You were my person too, I said, you still are. And then he was gone, disappearing through security, and I stood there watching people move through the airport and felt the weight of his absence settle on my shoulders like a physical thing. The first few weeks after Jason left were harder than I expected. I'd gotten so used to having him in my life that his absence felt like a limb I'd lost. I'd text him things during the day and forget for a moment that he was 3,000 miles away. I'd make dinner and set 2 places at the table before remembering that I was eating alone. But something shifted in me during those weeks, something necessary. I started saying yes to things I would normally have said no to. A coworker invited me to happy hour, and instead of making an excuse, I went. I joined a community theater group that was doing a production of The Crucible, and for the first time in years I was on stage performing, being seen. You're coming out of your shell, my mother said when she called one Sunday. You sound different, you sound happy. I am, I said, and I was surprised to realize that it was true. Not the happiness that comes from someone else making your life complete, but the harder, more durable happiness that comes from building a life you're actually proud of. Dr. Chen noticed it too. In one of our sessions in October, she said, "You're not looking for someone to save you anymore, you're learning to save yourself." I was also learning to appreciate the parts of myself that I'd abandoned when I was with Daniel. I started reading again, actual books, not just articles online. I took a creative writing class, something I'd always wanted to do. I volunteered at a local youth center as a math tutor, which turned out to be way more fulfilling than I'd expected. One of my students, a 13-year-old named Miguel, asked me one day why I was so passionate about math. Because math is a language that everyone can understand, I said. No matter where you're from or what you look like or who you love, math is the same, and there's something beautiful about that. There's something beautiful about a system that's fair and makes sense. Miguel smiled at me, and I realized that this moment of connection with a kid who needed to know that adults believed in him, this was what I was supposed to be doing all along. Not accounting. This. In November, Jason called me. I have good news, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Patricia sold the book. We're getting a publisher. It's going to be published in 18 months. That's incredible, I said, and I meant it completely. The jealousy I'd felt before was gone, replaced with genuine pride in my friend's accomplishments. There's more, Jason said. I'm coming home for Thanksgiving. Patricia wants me to start working on edits and the publishing house is based here, but there's no reason I can't do some of the work remotely, and I wanted to come home and see you if you want to see me." "Of course I want to see you," I said. "I've missed you every single day." "I've missed you too," Jason said, not in a sad way but in a way that makes me want to be in the same room as you again. Thanksgiving was 2 weeks away. I found myself counting down the days like a kid waiting for Christmas. I cleaned my apartment obsessively, rearranged the furniture, bought new sheets, made sure the guest bedroom was ready. I planned meals and made lists of places I wanted to take him, things I wanted to show him about my life now. When he arrived on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I barely recognized him at first. He'd cut his hair shorter and he looked more confident, more settled into himself. New York had done something to him, it had polished him, refined him, made him more fully himself. "Hi," he said at the airport gate, and his smile was tentative, like he wasn't quite sure if I'd changed too much, if we'd drifted too far apart. "Hi," I said back, and then I pulled him into a hug that probably looked ridiculous to anyone watching, but I didn't care. He was here and I could feel his solidity, his realness, and it grounded me. We drove back to my apartment and he was quiet, taking in the city like it was new to him. "It's different from New York," he said finally. "Is that good or bad?" I asked. "Just different," he said. "Quieter, more space. I missed it, but I don't think I could live here anymore. I've changed." "I know," I said. "I have too." That evening, we sat on my couch, the same couch I'd bought at a thrift store after I left Daniel, and we talked. Not the urgent, crisis-driven talking that we'd done that first night, but the slower, deeper kind of conversation that comes from months of processing and growing. I told him about my volunteer work at the youth center, about how I was thinking of going back to school to get my teaching credential, about how I'd finally accepted that my path wasn't Daniel's path or my mother's path or even my father's path. It was just mine. Jason told me about New York, the intensity of it, the way the energy never stopped, the way people there assumed you were either going to make it big or you were going to fail, and there was no in between. "I like the pressure," he admitted. "I like knowing that I'm competing with the best writers in the country. It makes me want to be better." "That's growth," I said. "So are you," he said, looking at me intently. "You're so different from the person I met at Walmart. You're more solid, more real." "So are you," I said back. We spent Thanksgiving cooking together, a chaotic affair where Jason made 3 attempts at gravy before getting it right, and I somehow managed to almost burn down the kitchen making sweet potato casserole. "We're a disaster," Jason said, laughing as he wiped flour off my face. "A beautiful disaster," I corrected. We ate in comfortable silence, and then Jason said something that had clearly been weighing on him. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and you can say no and we'll never talk about it again, but I need to ask." "Okay," I said carefully. "Do you think there's any possibility that we could be more than friends?" Jason asked. "Not right now, but maybe someday, when I've settled in New York and you've figured out the teaching thing, when we're both in a better place. Do you think there could be something romantic between us?" I'd been thinking about this question since the moment he left. I'd thought about it when I was alone in my apartment at night. I'd talked about it with Dr. Chen. I'd examined it from every angle, trying to figure out what my real feelings were versus what I wanted to feel. "Yes," I said finally, "I think there could be, but not right now." "Why not right now?" Jason asked, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that broke my heart a little. "Because right now, I'm still figuring out who Marcus is without someone else in my life defining him," I said. "And you're in the middle of the most important professional moment of your life. And if we tried to make this work now with all that pressure on us, it would either crush me or pull you away from your dreams, and I can't be responsible for that." "So you're saying maybe," Jason pressed. "I'm saying definitely maybe," I said. "I'm saying that if we both get to where we want to be and we're both still thinking about each other the way we're thinking about each other now, then we can try, but only then." Jason nodded and I could see the relief wash over his face. It was as if just knowing that it was possible made it easier to let it go for now. Jason went back to New York after Thanksgiving, but this time it didn't feel final. We'd established something between us that could sustain the distance, a commitment not to each other in a romantic way but to the possibility of each other. We talked on the phone every Sunday. Real conversations, not just quick check-ins. We'd sit on the phone for hours while one of us made dinner or walked through the city or sat on a balcony watching the sun set. I started thinking of these calls as the best part of my week, not because I was obsessed with Jason, but because they gave me something to look forward to, something that made me feel connected to the world beyond my own small life. December brought a lot of changes. I officially enrolled in an evening program to get my teaching credential. It was ambitious, working during the day as an accountant while going to school at night, but it felt right. It felt like the first time in my life that I was choosing something because I actually wanted it, not because it seemed practical or safe. Miguel, my student at the youth center, had a breakthrough that month. He'd been struggling with fractions and I'd been working with him week after week, trying different approaches, different explanations. Then one day, something clicked. "I get it," he said, jumping up and down. "I finally get it." And watching his face light up, watching him realize that he was capable of understanding something he'd thought was impossible, that was better than any paycheck I'd ever gotten as an accountant. "That's what you're supposed to be doing," Jason said when I told him about it on our Sunday call. "You're supposed to be changing lives." "I'm just teaching a kid fractions," I said. "No," Jason said firmly. "You're showing him that he's capable. You're showing him that someone believes in him. Do you know how rare that is for a 13-year-old? Do you know how much that can matter?" I'd never thought about it that way before. Christmas came and Jason couldn't make it home because he was doing final edits with Patricia. So I spent Christmas with my mother, who had finally, after months of careful explanation, understood that Daniel and I had broken up not because I'd failed at the relationship, but because we were incompatible. "I'm proud of you," she said over dinner, "for being brave enough to leave, for being brave enough to be alone." "I'm not alone," I said. "I have Jason." "Yes," my mother said, "but you're learning to be okay with yourself. That's important." January 2 came around, marking exactly 1 year since that night at Walmart. "I can't believe it's been a year," Jason said when we talked that Sunday. "I know," I said. "It feels like it was yesterday and also like it was a lifetime ago." "Do you regret it?" Jason asked. "Meeting me, do you regret that we weren't able to be together?" "No," I said immediately. "Jason, meeting you was the best thing that happened to me that year. You showed me that I could be loved even in my brokenness. You showed me that healing is possible. And you showed me that sometimes the people we're meant to connect with aren't the ones we're meant to be with romantically. Sometimes they're just the ones we're meant to be with, period." "I love you," Jason said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "I love you too," I said. "I do, but not yet in the way you might want." "I know," he said, "and that's okay, I'll wait." Part 10: The Fullness of Time. Spring of the following year brought more changes. My teaching credential program was going well. I'd started tutoring more students at the youth center, working with kids who were struggling with math, who'd been told they weren't good at it, who'd internalized the belief that they couldn't do it. I was showing them otherwise, one equation at a time. Jason's book was in its final stages of editing. He was sending me chapters to read, and they were beautiful. The story was about two men who meet unexpectedly and become each other's anchor in the storm. It was about healing, about learning to trust again, about friendship that transcends the typical categories we try to put relationships in. I knew it was about us, even though the characters were different, even though the circumstances were changed. I could see myself in the character of Marcus, could see Jason in the character of Aaron, and I could see our story, the true story of that night at Walmart, woven throughout every page. "People are going to think this is biographical," I said when he read a particular passage to me over the phone. "Is it?" Jason asked. "Partly," I said, "but also no, because it's better than real life. You've made it meaningful in ways that real life never quite achieves." "That's what fiction does," Jason said. "It takes the raw material of reality and refines it, makes sense of it." In May, I got a job offer. A private school in the city was looking for a math teacher for their middle school program, and they wanted to interview me. I went in with the understanding that I wouldn't actually get the job. I didn't have my credential yet, and I was competing with people who had years of experience. But I did get the job. They hired me on a provisional basis, and I could finish my credential while teaching, which was actually better than my current plan. I quit my accounting job on a Friday in May and I walked out of that office building feeling lighter than I had in years. I sent a group text to my mother, Dr. Chen, and Jason. I quit. The response was immediate. Jason called me before I'd even gotten to my car. You actually did it, he said. You actually left accounting. I actually did it, I confirmed. I'm so proud of you, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I'm proud of you too, I said. Your book comes out in 3 months. I know, Jason said. I'm terrified. You should be, I said. You're about to put your heart out into the world and there's no taking it back, but you're ready for it. Jason's book came out in August and it was a modest success. It didn't hit the bestseller list or anything, but it got good reviews. The New York Times called it a quietly powerful meditation on love, loss, and the people we find in the unexpected moments of our lives. More importantly, it resonated with people. I got messages from readers who said the book had helped them through their own breakups, their own lonely nights at 3 a.m. I got messages from people who said they'd recognized themselves in the characters, that they'd felt seen for the first time. Jason did a book tour and when he came through our city, the local bookstore was packed. I sat in the back and watched him read from his book and I was overcome with pride and also with something else, something that felt like love but not the romantic kind. It was the kind of love that acknowledges someone's brilliance, their courage, their fundamental goodness. After the reading, we went out with some of his friends from the city and we took a photo together that someone posted on Instagram. The caption read, "Local bookstore celebrates the launch of Unexpected Moments by Jason Chen, featuring author with longtime friend Marcus." Someone commented, "They look like they're in love." Jason texted me the next day, "Did you see that comment?" "Yeah," I said. "Are we," he asked, "in love?" "Yes," I said, "but not in the way they mean." "What if it turned into that way?" Jason asked. I took a long time answering because the answer had shifted. Over the past year and a half, something had changed. The distance had been good for us, had given us space to grow individually, and the growth had made us more compatible, not less. "Then I think I'd be ready for it," I said finally. "Yeah?" Jason asked, and his voice was hopeful. "Yeah," I said, "but not right now. You're in the middle of your book tour, I'm in the middle of my first year teaching. Let's let this moment be what it is and then we'll see where we are in 6 months." 6 months, Jason said. "I can do 6 months. Part 11, the epilogue. 6 months later, Jason came home again for Christmas. This time he stayed for 3 weeks, and this time when he looked at me, I was ready to look back the same way. We didn't make a big dramatic announcement about changing our relationship status. Instead, we just started spending time together in a different way. He'd bring me coffee in the morning before I went to work. I'd pick him up from the airport and we'd drive through the city, his hand on my knee. We'd cook dinner together and end up dancing in my kitchen to songs on my phone. It was easy in a way that I hadn't expected. Easy because we'd already built a foundation of deep trust and understanding. Easy because we'd both grown into people who knew who we were and what we wanted. On New Year's Eve, we went back to that same diner where we'd had breakfast after our first Walmart night. Dorothy was still working there, she remembered us. "You two are back," she said with a knowing smile. "And you look different, happy different." "We are," Jason said, taking my hand under the table. We ate pancakes and drank bad coffee and watched the clock count down to midnight. And when it hit 12:01 on January 1st, Jason kissed me and it felt like coming home. "I love you," he said when we pulled apart. "I love you too," I said. "I always have. I think I just needed to become myself first." "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," Jason said. We didn't move in together right away. We took things slowly, deliberately, making sure that this was right, that we weren't just riding the wave of nostalgia or proximity. But by the spring, Jason had found a job at a nonprofit in the city that allowed him to work remotely part of the time, and he'd started spending more time here than in New York. By summer, he'd made the decision to move back permanently. "My agent thinks I'm crazy," he said. "She thinks I should stay in New York to network, to be in the middle of things." "What do you think?" I asked. "I think that New York was important for me," he said. "It gave me what I needed to grow as a writer, but it's not where I belong anymore. I belong here, with you, in this city that we're both becoming ourselves in." "We got a place together?" A two-bedroom apartment in the Arts District not far from where Jason had lived before. We adopted a second cat, a black and white tuxedo cat that Jason named Oscar because he said the cat had the dramatic energy of someone who'd won multiple Academy Awards. Freddie and Oscar took to each other immediately, and watching them play together in the afternoon sunlight felt like watching our own story reflected back at us. That fall, I was nominated for the school's Teacher of the Year award. I didn't win, a biology teacher did, but just being nominated felt monumental. In my acceptance speech for being a finalist, I talked about how important it is to believe in people, to show them that they're capable, to be the adult in the room who says, "I believe you can do this." I thought about how Jason had been that person for me, how a stranger at Walmart had transformed into the person I'd build my life with simply by believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. The full circle. A year and a half after Jason moved back, we found ourselves at that same Walmart. We hadn't been there in a while. We'd both moved past the era of late-night crisis trips to retail stores. But Jason wanted to run in and grab something for dinner, and I came with him, and we found ourselves wandering the aisles like we had that first night. "Remember," Jason said, pulling me toward the greeting card section. We stood in front of the card I'd been reading that night, the one about new beginnings. It was still there, as if it had been waiting for us to come back and complete the circle. "Do you have regrets about that night?" I asked him. "Not a single one," Jason said. "Even though it came from a place of pain, it led us here, and here is pretty wonderful." "Here is pretty wonderful," I agreed. We paid for our things and left the store, walking hand in hand to the car. The night air was cool and clear, and the parking lot lights made everything glow like a scene from a movie. "You know what's funny?" Jason said as we drove home. "What?" I asked. "I came to Walmart that night because I was running from something," he said, "but it turned out that I was actually running toward something, toward you, toward this." "I think that's usually how it works," I said. "We're so focused on what we're running from that we don't see what we're running toward." "Very philosophical," Jason said with a smile. "I got it from my therapist," I admitted. We drove home in comfortable silence, and when we got there, Jason pulled me into his arms on the couch and held me like he was still afraid I might disappear. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, even though he hadn't asked. "I know," he said, "but sometimes I still can't believe this is real, that we're real." "We're real," I confirmed. "We're messy and complicated, and we have baggage, and we sometimes drive each other crazy, but we're real." "I love you," Jason said. "I love you too," I said. And that was enough, that was everything. The end.